And
ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're very honored to have Dr. Chris Mackowski, editor-in-chief and co-founder of Emerging Civil War and the editor of the award-winning Emerging Civil War series. He is the historian in residence at Stevenson Ridge, an historic property on the Spotsylvania battlefield. Obviously, he's an expert in tonight's topic. And Chris has authored and co-authored nearly 24 books, and his articles have appeared in all the major Civil War magazines. In addition, in 2023, he was selected as the Copy Hill Fellow at the American Battlefield Trust. Additionally, as if he wasn't already doing enough, he is a writing professor at St. Bonaventure University in upstate New York and the assistant dean for undergraduate programs. Let's give a big welcome to Chris Mackowski.
I was going to shake your hand. Let me take a second to set up here. Probably the best part of the Hatch renovations is they got rid of the big podium in the middle, right? Which I know most people like, but for those of you who've seen me before, I tend to move around a little bit. Just a little. So first of all, thank you for having me. You guys always make me feel like rock stars, so I really appreciate you guys, the warm welcome everybody shows. If you've been here for one of my talks before, you know I love to do the selfie for the Emerging Civil War Facebook page. So let's tell everybody, hello. Yeah, that was pretty good. All right. And he waved and everything. I didn't have to prompt that. Wow, that's great. So it was really gratifying. One thing that Ann left out of my bio is I'm on the advisory board for the roundtable. And it's just, we're super proud to listen to all the achievements that John talked about that this roundtable does. And he came over and he says, I tell people we've got 1,100 members and nobody believes me. But it's like, you guys do it upright. I mean, you really are just a wonderful, vibrant community. And that's the thing I love most about this. It's not just showing up and having a roundtable and going home. You guys are a community. So give yourselves a round of applause for all the great stuff that you guys do for yourselves. So I'm with a group of historians called Emerging Civil War. Eric Wittenberg, Kevin Pollack, they'll be speaking to you later this year. They're part of our organization. There are more than 30 of us, public historians, people who've worked the front lines, dealt with visitors, really kind of just spreading the gospel of the Civil War because we want to help people stay connected with what we believe is America's defining event. You can find us online at www.emergingcivilwar.com. We have free content every day, lots of different writers, writing styles, interests, backgrounds, and it's all free. We want to help people stay connected with that story. We do have a book series. I do have some of my books from that book series available on the table down here. Please come and see me. One of the books that I was supposed to have tonight was a brand new hardcover, 130,000 words about the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And I'm literally waiting for my ship to come in. That boxes and boxes of books are on a ship heading toward Baltimore right now. And they were supposed to be here. So next time my publisher, Ted Savis, comes to see you, you'll have to kind of get on his case a little bit for not having my books here for me. I am taking pre-orders. If folks want to come and see me afterwards, I'd be glad to take down your information and make sure you get a book that's signed in the mail. I do have another book about the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, a paperback. It's a little more reader-friendly, part of the Emerging Civil War series. We consider them sort of gateway drugs to get people hooked on the Civil War, and then they can go into something a little bit more in-depth. So please come and see me. Emerging Civil War has a podcast. We've got that every week. You can get that for free through Spotify and Apple. We have a symposium we do the first weekend of every August. Our next symposium coming up next year is going to be The Cities of War. Harold Holzer will be our keynote speaker. We'll have 10 speakers all together, and historian John Hennessy will be doing a tour of Fredericksburg. So feel free to find out information on our blog. Now, with all of that set aside, I'll ask us to kind of just bring up the last slide. I have a whopping 3 slides for my PowerPoint, which if you guys know me, like I don't typically do PowerPoint. But I've got one other slide, and we maybe could advance that. And while we're waiting for that, I just want to give a shout out to the crew here at Hatch. Thank you very much for the great work you guys do to make sure that we're all seen and heard. Let's give it up for the Hatch folks. So this is the bloody angle at Spotsylvania Courthouse, and you can see the sumac is almost getting ready to flush red. It's a beautiful spot to be. Has anybody been to Spotsylvania Courthouse and walked around out there? Okay, a few of you have. And you know, like it's a gorgeous battlefield, because what you see if you go out there today is very close to what the soldiers saw when they showed up there on May 8th, 1864. The tree lines are pretty much the same. The fields are pretty much the same. So it's like walking back into time. It's a battlefield that's preserved as a time capsule. And there are a couple monuments. You can see one here to the Ohio Regiment that's out there. But for the most part, it's not monumented like you see it at Gettysburg or Shiloh or Vicksburg or something like that. And so you can really see and feel that atmosphere. And when we explore this story tonight and we juxtapose what happened there with how beautiful it is a sublime experience. Now, to understand how the armies got there, we actually have to back up a little bit to the beginning of May 1864, when the two armies clash on the 5th, 6th, and 7th in the wilderness of Virginia, a 70-acre second growth deciduous jungle that's going to be in that corner of the auditorium. And there, Ulysses S. Grant, he's the new sheriff in town. He has told his army commander, George Gordon Meade, that Richmond is no longer the objective. Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia is the objective. Because up to this point in the war, it's been capture the flag. Basically, let's capture Richmond, we'll win the war. Yeah. There was much rejoicing. But Richmond isn't important, because it's the Confederate armies that are keeping the Confederacy in the battle, keeping them in the war, keeping their hopes alive. And so Grant tells Meade, where Lee goes, you shall go too. This is particularly important because it's an election year. Abraham Lincoln is not going to get reelected if they don't do something to break the stalemate that has been the Eastern Theater. That's why Grant was brought out here from the West. And what Grant wants to do is use his overwhelming numbers to just score a knockout blow, a war of annihilation. He's got 120,000 men to start this campaign with, compared to only 66,000 Confederates. And he just wants to use the sheer weight of numbers to knock Lee out. But, and this is important, he says if he can't do that, then if by no other means than attrition, will simply wear the Confederates out. So if I can't get that knockout blow, rabbit punches to the kidneys, and we're going to take them out that way. And so when Grant starts this campaign in May, he's going to head off to Richmond, which is off in that direction. He's first going to set sights on the village of Spotsylvania Courthouse, which will be represented by our flag, which is a little ironic because it's a Confederate town in Virginia, but there it is, okay? And the reason Grant wants to move there is because there's a secret stash of Confederate gold in the basement of the courthouse. No, not really. No, that's not true at all. In fact, Spotsylvania Courthouse itself, the building is not important. The village isn't important. But what is important is the road network around the village that gives Grant the inside track to Richmond. Richmond is not important. But by moving on Richmond, Grant knows Lee has got to come out and fight him and block the way. And that's going to give Grant that chance for that knockout blow. So that's why he's moving in that direction. But of course, Robert E. Lee, he dances to his own tune if he can. And as Grant's moving down from the wilderness, Lee pounces on him in the wilderness itself. And the reason he does that is because he wants to use that second growth deciduous jungle to negate Grant's numeric advantage. Because Grant might have 120,000 guys, and they're all going to line up shoulder to shoulder, just like you're sitting. How do you move in that formation through a jungle? You can't. That's the secret. So by attacking in the wilderness, Lee is going to negate Grant's numerical superiority. Grant can't deploy his artillery because there aren't any big open spaces. There are only a couple handfuls. Okay. He can't move his cavalry around. So that's why the wilderness becomes so important for Lee. And so they're going to fight there on the 5th. They're going to fight there on the 6th. They're going to skirmish throughout the 7th with the woods burning around them, men stacking up bodies to use as breastworks to hide behind as they skirmish with invisible enemies. And here is where Grant changes the war. This is so important. I'll hop back up here to make sure you can see this, because I'm going to speak heresy for a second. This is like center stage heresy. How many of you have heard that Gettysburg is the turning point of the war? Balderdash. It's the wilderness. And you know why? 2 reasons. First, after Gettysburg, the strategic situation doesn't change. Robert E. Lee moves with impunity throughout Northern Virginia after that battle, right? But secondly, up to this point in the war, the armies clash, they fight, they withdraw, and then they'll spend a few weeks or even a few months resupplying, re-equipping, reinforcing, trying to catch their breath. But after this fight in the wilderness, Grant simply decides he's going to just go around the Confederates and keep heading toward the courthouse. He changes the very nature of how this war is fought. There is no catching your breath. Remember, he wants to use the Confederates up by attrition. We're not giving them the time to call a timeout. And so he's going to continue down towards Spotsylvania using this road that is conveniently alongside the side of the auditorium here. This is called the Brock Road, and it's going to lead us into Spotsylvania. And so Grant captures the key intersection that gives him this straight road to Spotsy. So as he marches down the night of the 7th, and his men realize they're moving forward, not backward, they begin to cheer wildly, even though they've been through just this brutal, awful inferno of a battle. They realize there's no turning back, which Grant had vowed to a newspaper reporter. So he's going to come down this road and head towards Spotsy. And as he goes, George Gordon Meade, the commander of the Army of the Potomac, knows that he has to have this road clear. And so he sends his cavalry under Phil Sheridan, a man whom I will have things to say about in just a few moments, to clear the road. And his troopers can't because they are being opposed effectively by Confederate cavalry under Wade Hampton. And so as they're pushing their way down, under Fitzhugh Lee, Wade comes in just a second. So as they're fighting and skirmishing, the Federal cavalry is finally like, oh, we can't do it. And they're going to fall back to a place where the 2 of you are now camped out called Todd's Tavern. It's a beautiful little spot. Look, you 2 look very happy there. That's nice. Okay, Todd's Tavern was recently preserved by the American Battlefield Trust. So if you helped with that, thank you very much for your efforts. And so the cavalry encamps in the fields around the tavern. Meade and Grant, riding side by side at the head of the infantry, get here and they see all these sleeping troopers. And I don't know if you guys know much about George Gordon Meade. He's a very calm, demure, Zen sort of fellow. I'm waiting for someone to like, what? No, he's not. He's got a terrible temper. His men call him the goddamn Google-eyed snapping turtle. And I apologize for using the Lord's name in vain in this auditorium. But that's like his men. His top aide, Theodore Lyman, calls him Old Peppery. Okay, this is a dude with a terrible temper. And he sees these sleeping cavalrymen and he starts kicking butts. Get up, what are you doing? I told you to clear that road. And they try to go clear the road again and they can't. In the meantime, Meade looks for Phil Sheridan and can't find him. Sheridan's off gallivanting in that direction toward the old Chancellorsville battlefield. Sheridan finally comes up. He's like, what are you doing? Giving orders to my division commanders. And that's a direct quote. And he and Meade get in this big blow up of a fight. It's insubordination. It's the kind of thing that gets you fired. Except Meade can't fire Sheridan because when Grant came to the east, he brought Sheridan with him. Sheridan is one of Grant's cronies. So the best Meade can do is after this fight, which Meade of all people de-escalates, he goes to Grant. He's like, your buddy. Like, well, what happened? And so Meade recounts this argument, during which at one point Sheridan says, if you just let me go, I'll take the cavalry off and go stop Jeb Stuart all by myself. And he said it just like that. Okay. And when Meade tells Grant this, Grant says, did he say that really? Meade's like, well, yeah. Grant says, well, Sheridan generally knows what he's talking about. Cut the orders and let him try. Right? And I have to call Phil Sheridan out at this because he does take the cavalry. Off he goes, 22,000 troopers. They go toward Richmond on a raid. They draw Jeb Stuart, the head of the Confederate cavalry, out, who follows him down toward Richmond. There's a battle on May 11th at a place called Yellow Tavern where Stuart is shot in the gut, mortally wounded. He dies on May 12th. And so generally history gives Phil Sheridan a free pass. Oh, look, he killed Jeb Stuart. Yeah, right? He just rode off with the eyes and ears of the Army of the Potomac. So Meade is now going to go through the next 2 weeks, almost 2.5 weeks, blind and deaf. And he will grope his way across this Spotsylvania landscape using his infantry because he doesn't have cavalry to scout. And it's going to cost thousands of federal lives. And that's why I call Sheridan out. No free pass. It costs thousands of lives because Meade is left without eyes and ears. So as Meade tries to clear this road, Sheridan shows up. He still can't get it to happen. So Meade's going to then use his infantry to continue the push. Okay? And he's going to try to drive the Confederates out of here. Now, this is the danger of sitting in the front row. Can I have the two of you stand up for just a second and be my volunteers? That's why people sit in the back in church too, right? Okay. So you two have both just been drafted into the Confederate Army. I hope nobody's going to take offense to that. Okay. Now let's pretend we'll bring you over here. Because I mean, if you're up, I might as well make you work. All right. Come on over here. All right. Now I want you to look at these rows. It's basically little ridges that the road has to pass over. Now, the cavalry can't stand up to the infantry. So what Fitzlee does is pretty ingenious, and he's going to split his forces in half, ergo 2 of you, right? So I'm going to have you stand right here. You stand right there where you're at, okay? Now, if we're coming down the road, you're going to block the road, okay? So then what I have to do as the infantry is I have to deploy from column of march into line of battle. And I'm going to finally sweep forward. I'm going to outflank you on both ends. And just as I get within rifle range, you're just going to hop on your horse and ride back here. Come on back here to the next ridge line. Look at that. Guess he needs a pair of coconuts. Right? Okay. So now I have to get back into column of march, push forward, and you have blocked the road at the next ridge line. So now I have to redeploy again, push forward, and just as I get within rifle range, what do you think happens? There, do you have coconuts? Okay, there it goes. Oh, see, it's pretty good, right? Okay. Now I've got to get back into my column, push forward. Look, he has gone to the next ridge and blocked the road again. So now I've got to get back into line of battle, push forward, and you, again, hop on your horses and go. Let's give it up for our cavalry. Well done, fellas. Well done. Yeah. And so this leapfrog defense buys the time that the Confederates need in order to get themselves out of the wilderness. Because Grant has the straight road. Lee is still stuck in the wilderness. He's going to have to cut his own road out of the woods, link up with a road that runs parallel to the west, hook down twice as far to get to this spot. So in order to do that, he needs to have time. So that's why the delaying action of our 2 cavalrymen has been so important, to give Lee's infantry time to make that long march. The man charged with that is a guy named Richard Heron Anderson, who is a hard fighter, but also sort of a vanilla sort of character. And in an army that is driven by personality like Lee and Longstreet and Stuart and Stonewall Jackson, having a guy who's vanilla probably doesn't quite measure up to the pantheon. He's in charge because just days earlier, on the 6th of May, James Longstreet, Lee's old war horse, the great hammer of the Army of Northern Virginia, was accidentally shot by his own men leading a flank attack through the wilderness against, Jesus, this sounded awful familiar, isn't it? It sounds exactly like Stonewall Jackson and Chancellorsville, right? In fact, that happens 3 miles away just a year and 4 days later. Longstreet is knocked out. Now, this is going to be especially important for this whole campaign, because Grant has come from the West. Robert E. Lee doesn't know him. And if Lee has one superpower, it's that he can read his enemy, get a feel for him, and basically anticipate what they're going to do. He's brilliant at that in the first part of the war. But he doesn't know this Grant guy. Who in the Army does? 2 people. Cadmus Wilcox, Uncle Billy Fixins is his nickname, and James Longstreet. Those 2 men had served with Grant out in the West, in St. Louis, in the pre-war army. They knew him well. Both of them stood up for Grant at Grant's wedding. So the one guy, so we don't know that Lee had much of a relationship with Cadmus Wilcox, but we know that he was very close with James Longstreet. And the one guy that can give Lee any insight into Grant is taken off the board on the 2nd day of the campaign. It's catastrophic for Lee as he's trying to figure Grant out. It's also important because this campaign is going to become defensive in nature. And we all know Longstreet tends to be defensive-minded in his strategic thinking. So again, the very sort of warfare this campaign is going to unfold into, Longstreet is taken off the board. So Anderson is tapped to take his place, and Lee tells him that he is to lead the column out of the wilderness at 2 a.m. on May 8th. But where the First Corps is encamped, the woods are burning around them. One of those infamous forest fires of the wilderness is burning. And so Anderson's going to lead his men out starting at 10 p.m. on the 7th, a 4-hour head start. And that's going to make all the difference, because as his men get out of the wilderness and they finally get clear and in camp to catch a breath, a rider comes up from Jeb Stuart. Oh my gosh, we need infantry. We need infantry. Our leapfrog defense has gotten backed up to the last defensible ridge outside of the city, outside of the village. Okay? If we can't hold this spot, Grant gets into Spotsylvania. His plan is to be there by 8 o'clock in the morning. So as the Confederate cavalry takes possession of this ridge, Stuart sends a messenger to Anderson, hurry up, hurry up. And so Anderson's men will basically double time the last 2 miles to get into position. And they'll start running up even as the Federals get down into this area, begin to once again deploy and push forward. Now this fighting down the road, I always liken it to an accordion. Line of battle, column of march, line of battle, column of march. And it has mixed up the advanced units of Gouverneur K. Warren's 5th Corps. So by the time they get to the edge of Spotsylvania, there's no unit cohesion. There's going to be piecemeal attacks, poor communication. Parts of different brigades are going to be mixed up with each other. So the 1st Brigade is going to actually come down on this side of the road, Peter Lyle's 6 regiments. And for the first time, the horsemen don't hop on their horses and ride away. Infantry is literally rushing into that spot, even as Lyle's men make that attack. Jeb Stuart is riding up and down the line, pointing, telling Anderson's men, run up there. If you don't get to that fence post first, Billy Yank's going to beat you. And Anderson's men run in. They get to the point of attack at the right moment, at the right time, and repulse Lyle's men. Next up is Denison's Maryland Brigade. They're going to come down on the other side of the road. Stuart points to that spot. Anderson's men rush there, even as Denison's men get to that spot. A third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth brigade is going to come down here. And Stuart, riding up and down the line, laughing wildly, having the time of his life. It's arguably his best or second best day of the war. And he plugs guys in at the point of crisis, at the moment of crisis, and repulses these attacks. Gouverneur K. Warren, the commander of the 5th Corps, has had a couple bad days in the wilderness. He has not performed up to expectations. He suffers so many casualties that he's pretty shaken up. And so having his lead division, Robinson's division, repulsed, gets his dander up. And he tries to rally his men. And they're like, we're not going back into that. Are you kidding me? And so it's going to take a couple hours for him to bring his other 2 divisions up. The effect of all this delaying, aside from delaying, has been that it has created a bottleneck for Grant's army that stretches all the way back to the wilderness. Grant can't, literally, he can't get his troops onto the field. So after these initial brigades are repulsed, it's going to take a couple hours for Warren to get his next 2 divisions into position and attack. He's going to attack with 2/3 of his 5th Corps. More Confederates are rushing onto the battlefield, getting into position. They're able to repulse that. And now Warren's really upset because he continues to get repulsed. And so the one advantage here is that by getting all these guys onto the field, the next portion of the army can come up. John Sedgwick's 6th Corps, the largest corps in the army, about 23,000 guys. And they're going to deploy kind of in this area here. So you guys have just turned into the 6th Corps. I hope I haven't offended anybody there. Okay. Their commander, John Sedgwick, he's the senior officer on the field, but he sees Warren is just wild-eyed with frustration and anger. And he says, you know what? You've been here all day. You just tell me what you need me to do, and I will support you. I'll do what you need me to do. So Warren is going to organize his 5th Corps and Sedgwick's 6th Corps into a massive attack late in the day on May 8th. It's going to attack with half of the army. But more of these guys are getting onto the field, starting with the beginnings of the 2nd Corps, and they're going to start filling in this area up through here. And so as that attack comes, they are once more repulsed. And in fact, it's so confusing, Robert Rhodes's division literally marches onto the field and into a counterattack, nearly drives the Federals off the field themselves. Darkness falls, and this is the situation where we've got kind of Confederates still rushing onto the field and Federals trying to get onto the field. The 2nd Corps under Winfield Scott Hancock is stuck back by Todd's Tavern. Can the 2 of you wave your hands up just so we can remember where Todd's Tavern is? Look, they're still having a lovely time. You know, are you taking advantage of the Todd's Tavern hot tub? Is that it? Yeah, love it. So Hancock is stuck back there. The final portion of the army under Ambrose Burnside, the 9th Corps, can't even get to the battlefield. So they're going to have to march to the east and come down the back road into Spotsylvania over here. This is modern day Route 208 for anybody who's familiar with the area. My wife's family owns property right over in here. Because it's Ambrose Burnside, nobody cares about it, so nobody ever preserved it. So it's not part of the Park Service. So my wife's stepfather bought it in 2000, and then I got to marry into it 10 years ago. Like, whoo, yeah. I tell my wife, though, I love her for more than her earthworks. I really do. She's got very nice earthworks, though. She does. So they come down here. They're led by a cavalry force on the 8th. They kind of get into Lee's rear and are driven out. But it's really the 9th when Burnside's force is going to get into position. There's going to be a lot of back and forth fighting on the morning of the 9th. The official records call it the Battle of the Nye, which is a really generous description of a fight that lasts a couple hours. The reason it even lasts that long is because there's a bridge that bottlenecks Burnside's forces, and he just can't get over enough guys in a timely fashion. But he eventually is able to drive them, the Confederates, off the field, and he's going to park over here. Meanwhile, Grant is over here on the 9th, trying to get a sense of what the lines look like. John Sedgwick, senior general on the field, he hears that his men down along the Brock Road are getting shot at. There's an artillery position down there. His infantry is trying to get into position, and he loves his guys. So he wants to get out and see if he can help them out. Sedgwick is a 50-year-old bachelor who's been married to the Army his whole life, from Cornwall Hollow, Connecticut. And he's one of those guys that when he's out on campaign with his men, he sleeps under the stars. He doesn't take over somebody's house. Like, he sleeps out with his men. They call him Uncle John. They love him so much. And he loves them. And so that's why he wants to get out and straighten this out. And his staff is like, you don't belong in the front line. You're a major general. He's like, oh, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. And he comes down here and he starts directing guys to move around. And, that infantry unit just deployed in front of those artillery. Let's move them here. And as they're doing this, Confederates over here continue taking pot shots. It's about 600 yards. I feel like you're really isolated there. I apologize. You're about to have a bad day. I'm sorry, okay? It's about 600 yards. I myself am not a shooter, but I'm told 600 yards is a pretty good shot. But these are guys, it's Kershaw's brigade from the upcountry in South Carolina. Squirrel hunters used to shooting small things at large distances, so it's possible. But mostly it's just harassing fire. And so as these gunshots come in and guys are ducking, and Sedgwick's like, what are you ducking for? Like, you never hear the bullet that kills you. Like, ducking, it doesn't do you any good. And one of the artillery said, well, I ducked at one of the big ones once that saved my life. And Sedgwick laughs at him. He says, all right, well, do you think it helps? Go ahead, you can duck. But I'm telling you, they couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. The guys are ducking and the snipers keep shooting. And Sedgwick keeps laughing. And he says, I tell you, they can't hit an elephant at this distance. They can hit a major general. As soon as he says it that second time, he gets shot 1.5 inches below the left eye. Whirls around, falls dead on the ground, blood fountaining out of his face. Sorry to put you in that spot. It's terrible stuff. Terrible stuff. All right. If you go to the battlefield today, there's a marker at the entrance to the national park where Sedgwick was shot. And allegedly that marks the spot as opposed to kind of the general area. His men were very adamant about marking the location. He's the highest ranking Union officer killed in the Civil War. When Grant hears about this, he kind of has to collect himself. And he says, like, the loss of Sedgwick is worth a division. And think about that for a second. The loss of Sedgwick is worth 10,000 people. Okay? And he's not one of those generals who had like lots of razzle dazzle and pizzazz, but he is one of those generals, like, if you wanted something done, call on Sedgwick. He's not going to do it with any sort of flash. Might take him a while to get it done, but it'll get done. Okay? And so the blow to morale is what's worth 10,000 people. And he'll be replaced by his protege, a guy named Horatio Wright. Wright's actually the third person in line in the Corps. The second person in line is James Ricketts, who's basically like, I don't want to do that. You do it. And so he'll manfully step aside and let Wright ascend to the spot. And everybody sort of knew that if something happened to Sedgwick, Sedgwick wanted Wright to get the spot. So he's going to get it. So it's a huge learning curve for Wright because he's got the largest corps in the Army that he has to manage. And he's going to have some subordinates that are going to come to him with an idea for a brand new type of tactical assault. So Wright's going to have a learning curve that he's going to have to overcome as well. Now, the idea for this new type of assault comes from some of the 6th Corps engineers. The guys are out doing some scouting and checking things out. And as they've been investigating the Confederate lines, they see that Lee's line's nice and straight through here, but then it curves up in a big bubble. We're going to go up and around, and Sharon and Wally, your guys are about to have a bad day. I apologize. Wally's been so patient tonight, sitting here, and like he's about to have a bad day. And it's going to curl back here before then heading back over to Spotsylvania. This big bulge is shaped like a horseshoe or a mule shoe. And so we'll get the name the mule shoe salient. And a salient is basically a bubble in the line that sticks out and is vulnerable to attack from multiple directions at once. So it's an inherently weak formation. If you are in the salient shooting out, you have what's called diverging fire. your fire fans out over distance. Well, your enemies who are on the outside shooting in have what's called converging fire. Their fire concentrates on you. Okay. So your offensive power is weakened while theirs is strengthened. Also, if you're defending this position, you're susceptible to a crossfire. Because, John, you can shoot at me from where you're at if I'm defending right here, but your cannonballs can also come over and hit these guys. Right? And so if we have a crossfire from multiple directions, that really creates a hard position for these guys as well. It's also vulnerable because if you break through at any spot, you're in the rear of the whole line. And so it makes the whole position untenable. So these are reasons why when Lee inspects his line on the morning of May 9th and he sees this, he's a trained engineer. He's like, oh, this is terrible. We got to see what we can do about this. Let's just seal that off and have the line go straight across the front of the stage. But as they continue to talk about this position, Second Corps Commander Richard Ewell, who's in charge here, he points out that right where the table is, in the middle of the salient, is a piece of high ground. It's a farm owned by Neil McCool. He lives there with his 3 sisters. And if the Federals get that high ground, they can use it as an artillery platform that can enfilade the line that way and enfilade the line that way, shoot down the side, down the length of it. That's a bad idea. So if we can deny that artillery platform to the Federals, that would be important. So as Lee confers with Ewell, his chief engineer, Martin Luther Smith, says, you know what, if we put enough artillery in the mule shoe, we can hold it. And Ewell says, if we put enough artillery in the mule shoe, we can hold it. The artillerists say, if we put enough artillery in the mule shoe, we can hold it. And Lee says, okay. Now let me repeat that. Lee says, okay. Lee's a trained engineer. They've talked about the pros and cons. He's got expertise advice. He's the Harry Truman of this army. The buck stops here, right? I point this out because calamity is about to befall this position, and Lee gets a free pass in history. We'll talk a little bit about that as far as why, but Lee gives the okay to this. So as the Federals are looking at this and they see this bulge, and they find a spot right over here on the edge where they can get within about 300 yards because the slope of the ground keeps them hidden from sight. And so they can actually sneak up just like this. Confederates won't be able to see them. And they're just going to make a mad dash across about 300 yards of open space and punch through the line right here in the side. A fellow by the name of Emory Upton is given this task. He's 24-year-old up-and-comer, just recently graduated from West Point. The dude has no sense of humor whatsoever, but his men respect him. They don't love him because he's one of those colonels that's trying to earn his reputation by throwing his men into every heavy fight he can find. But to his credit, and this is why his men respect him, is he's one of those guys that leads from the front. He's not saying, go over there and do that. He's like, follow me, boys. And so his brigade has gone through a really tough time, but his leadership of that brigade has earned their respect. And so that's why he's called on to do this. And what they want to do is handpick 12 regiments, 6,000 guys. And instead of lining them up shoulder to shoulder as you guys are seated, what they want to do is stack them like a fist. So we're looking at depth rather than width. And the idea is to sprint across this field, punch through, create a hole that then reinforcements can flood into. Because remember, the Confederate line isn't deep. They've got guys that are, on the front line, but it's not like they've got, regiments and regiments stacked deep. So if you can snap that line, you've got a good chance of breaking through. Upton, very excited. He says, Mac, who can't win with troops such as these? And so he's going to launch this attack on the 10th of May. To help him, Gouverneur K. Warren over here is supposed to launch an attack against this position again. Warren's guys don't want to go. They know how awful the fighting was here on the 8th. They know how impregnable this position is. Winfield Scott Hancock is going to find himself deployed over there. He's going to get across the river almost into Lee's rear, only to discover he's got one more river to cross. So now he's actually caught in a trap. Confederates are going to try to get him. So he's going to get knocked out of the action. And that's going to allow Warren the chance to launch his attack early to try to redeem his reputation. We'll come back to that in a second. Meanwhile, over here, on the far side of the battlefield, Ambrose Burnside is going to attack from the area that is now Stevenson Ridge and come into the backside against the courthouse. The idea is if Burnside attacks here and Warren attacks over there, it's going to tie down Confederates so they can't shift as reinforcements against Upton's attack here. And if Upton breaks through, creates that hole, there's going to be a division under Gershom Mott, who's just going to come due north, right into that hole. It's going to slide right in there. That's the plan. But it's going to take Upton a little longer to get into position, so they're going to delay the attack until 6. Meanwhile, as I said, Warren's going to launch his attack early, and he'll get repulsed, which means he's not going to be available to tie these Confederates down when Upton has his attack. Meanwhile, nobody gets over to Burnside in time. He's too far away, so he launches his attack at 5 o'clock. Burnside's one of those guys who is easy to make fun of, not just because he's got crazy facial hair. I always describe him as spectacularly mediocre, okay? That's Burnside. But I do try to give him his due when it's due. And here's one of those instances where it's due, because he attacks, he gets all the way to the edge of the village. And then Grant's like, oh, you're too isolated. I can't support you. A counterattack leaves you vulnerable. Dig in. And so Burnside gets as close to Spotsylvania as anybody in the Federal Army over the course of these nearly 2 weeks, and he is called off. Gershom Mott, likewise, does not get the memo. So 5 o'clock comes, he comes advancing across this field. The artillerists that are in the mule shoe have nothing else to shoot at. Let's shoot at Gershom Mott. And they blast Mott's division off the field. Ewell said, I can hold this position if I have enough artillery. And he proves it on the 10th. Boom. So when Upton launches his attack at 6 o'clock, he's lost his support on his right. He's lost his reinforcements from the north. He breaks through. His guys peel open this hole. He's looking for reinforcements. Where's Gershom Mott? There's no Gershom Mott. He has his own reserves, 3 regiments of Vermonters who aren't where they're supposed to be. They got so excited, they rushed into the battle already. In fact, there'll be several Medal of Honor recipients as a result of that. But Upton has done what he said he would do. He has broken through the Confederate line, and this is such a new tactic that the Army doesn't know how to exploit it. And now suddenly these reinforcements from the Confederacy who are not being tied down get pulled over and start filling in the gap. Ewell yells to his men, hold on, boys, I'll have enough reinforcements here in 5 minutes to drive all these Yankees out of here. And indeed he does. Ewell has a fantastic day on the 10th. Now, when Upton was sent into this, he said, you know, if you come back, you're going to get promoted to brigadier general. If you don't succeed, don't come back. Right? He gets driven back. He will get his star, even though his attack fails, because he did what he was supposed to do. And Grant recognizes this. And he and Meade talk, and they realize, like, Upton did what he was going to do, just the rest of the Army wasn't ready. We need to be better coordinated. And that gets Grant thinking. So if Upton can do this with 6,000 men, what if we try it with 20,000? And this time, what if we have reinforcements ready to flood the gap? Let's say another 20,000 guys. So he's going to put into motion plans to replicate Upton's attack on a much larger scale on the 12th of May, hitting the Confederates right in the nose. See, I looked at you and you're like, what? Yes, you're in trouble, you. Okay. As Grant shifts his men on the 11th, He's going to use Winfield Scott Hancock's Second Corps. They're off by the Po River. He's got to shift them to the back of the auditorium. Okay. As he starts to move them, it starts raining on the 11th. And as Robert E. Lee is trying to read the tea leaves, remember his superpower is to try to anticipate what his enemy's up to, and he gets reports of this movement. And meanwhile, Burnside is over here moving around. And Lee starts thinking, okay, we're in the wilderness where we fought for a couple days, came to a standstill, and Grant just moved around my right flank. We've been here in Spotsylvania a couple of days. We fought to a standstill, and now I'm getting reports of movement toward my right flank. And so what do you think that puts in Lee's head? Grant's trying to go around me again, right? And so he's going to try to mobilize his army to get the jump on Grant to block him again. The first parts of the army that he's going to move will be his artillery. Specifically the artillery here in the Muleshoe, because they're the farthest away from the roads. The rain is turning these roads to muck. There's just a few farmlands here. So he pulls his artillery out. The Confederate division commander who's in charge right here at the very tip, Edward Allegheny Johnston, crusty old bugger who earned fame early in the war, was wounded in the foot at the Battle of McDowell during Jackson's Valley campaign. Went back to Richmond to convalesce, where he somehow, crusty as he is, earned a reputation as a Lothario, and then finally comes back to the army. He's a hard-fighting guy, good veteran with good instincts. He's got a walking stick that he now uses because of his injured foot, and as he hobbles around, his men call him Old Clubby, very politically correct, all right? And he uses that club, and he knocks people on the head when they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and he's stalking up and down the lines like, where's my artillery? Where's my artillery going? And he goes to Ewell. Where's my artillery? I'm getting reports from my pickets. There's something happening out there. And Ewell explains to him Lee's thinking. And Johnson says, well, I need some artillery here. Something's going to happen. And so Ewell sends word to Lee, who says, all right, I'll send the artillery back. But they're so far gone by that point that he says it'll be morning before they can return. So just hold tight, and we'll get that artillery back. So Johnson's stalking the line. Oh, calamity's coming. I can feel it in my bones. And in fact, it is. 20,000 Federals are getting into position at the Brown Farm and a mile to the north of the tip of the Muleshoe. Now, this is just a terrible march for Hancock's men. It's dark. It's raining. Nobody has done any reconnaissance because there's no cavalry. The roads are muddy. The streams flood. Guys write accounts about it being the worst night march of their entire army career. Francis Barlow, one of Hancock's division commanders, so confused by what's going on, he says, can someone please at least point me in the direction of the Confederates so I don't have to march all the way around the world and come at them from the rear? And they finally get into position, and the guys are just dog tired. Remember, they've been fighting and marching since they left camp on the 4th. And now they're getting ready for another attack. They don't know what's going on. Tensions are high. People are nervous. They're exhausted. Guys are standing in formation. They use the back of the person in front of them to scratch a letter home. You know, final words. Guys are writing their names on slips of paper to tuck them into their shirts so they can be identified. Guys are falling asleep on their feet. Other guys are just too wired up to fall asleep. Super, super tense. The attack is supposed to come at 4 o'clock in the morning, but this rain has cooled off what has otherwise been an unusually hot May. It has conjured fog out of the bottomlands. And so the forest where this attack is getting ready to take place is impenetrable. Hancock can't see. He asked for a delay till about 4:30 as dawn lightens the sky just enough for his men to see. And as he sends them forward at about 4:25, it turns out, he recognizes how desperate this is. He says, my boys, they will not come back to me. And they sweep through that early dawn fog, advancing. Right across the middle of this auditorium is an old farm lane called the Landrum Lane. And Confederates have advanced out there as a picket line. And it's a sunken farm lane, and so it looks like it's a fortification. And when Federals come sweeping up out of that forest and they hit that sunken road and they go, huzzah, because they think they've captured the Confederate position. All they do is scare the bejesus out of those poor pickets, who then come running across the field back into the main line. And that huzzah echoes through the fog and alerts Confederates in the main position that the Yankees are coming. They're going to take a second to dress their lines and advance forward, even as Confederates then scramble into position. They've had about a third of their men in the lines. About a third of them have been back with their rifles stacked, huddling against campfires, trying to stay warm in the rain, cooking up some breakfast. And about a third of their guys have been asleep. But that huzzah mobilizes everyone, and they get into line. And they get ready, aim, and they fire across that field. But they all are aiming at that sunken road. The one feature we can't really illustrate in the auditorium too well, but if you've been to Spotsylvania, it is the signature piece of topography. We have a nice square center section. I want you to visualize for a second a swale that cuts across this center section from that corner down toward this corner. So it cuts diagonally across the field of advance. So when Hancock's men leave the lane and they push forward, they get down into that swale. So when the Confederates fired, all their bullets go over top. The Federals are protected by that swale. Not that the Confederates are able to put up a huge sheet of flame at this point, because many of them find that their muskets are fouled. They had their rifles stacked, rain's gone down the barrel and wet the gunpowder. Rookie mistake, right? And so as they're frantically trying to clean their guns, Federals are coming across that field. They come sweeping up out of that swale right here, boom, and they smash in. Now we've got that fist that we talked about, that's under David Bell Birney. He's going to be coming over on this side, Francis Barlow, and he's going to be over on this side. And then David Bell Birney is going to be in a traditional line of battle straight forward. We're going to have like a left hook and a sweep, boom, right in here. And they're going to peel this part of the mule chute open. As forces come flooding down in this direction, Johnston hobbling up and down on top of the earthworks with his cane in one hand, a rifle in the other, beating at the hordes of Federals till the sheer weight of numbers overwhelms him, and he's hauled off to the rear as a prisoner. One of his brigade commanders, a guy named George Maryland Stewart, also gets captured. He's captured by a Major Beaver from a Pennsylvania unit. If you're a Penn State fan and you've heard of Beaver Stadium, it's named after this guy who captured Stewart. And he says, like, I'm here to get your surrender. Who are you? He says, I'm Major Stewart of the Confederate Army. And Beaver thinks he's captured Jeb Stuart. He's like, oh, are you Jeb Stuart? Like, no, sir, I'm not. That's how Maryland Stewart got his nickname, because everyone kept making that mistake. So they started calling him Maryland Stewart because he's from Maryland. So Major Beaver says, well, I demand your sword and surrender. And Stewart, he's just so mad. He's like, well, sir, y'all have arrived so early this morning, I haven't had time to get my sword. So he gets hauled off to the rear as a prisoner as well. Both men will find themselves at Winfield Scott Hancock's headquarters at the Landrum Farm, which is at the end of that farm lane. Hancock had known both officers in the pre-war army. In fact, he and Johnson had been really good friends. They used to like to play elaborate practical jokes on their buddies. And he finds Johnson sitting on an ammunition crate, just weeping openly with his head buried in his hands over the destruction of his division. And Hancock tries to comfort his old friend, and Johnson just like, oh, this is a calamity, this is a calamity. But he gathers himself together and he looks at his friend and he says, if this had to happen to me, I'm glad it was you if it was anybody. Very magnanimous in defeat. Stewart a little less so. Hancock comes over to him and says, George, old friend, well, sir, under the circumstances, I cannot accept your hand. And Hancock jerks his hand back and he says, well, under other circumstances, I wouldn't have offered it. And so Johnson and Stewart will get sent to the rear with the rest of the prisoners. Some 3,000 prisoners are scooped up in this attack. Now, as is customary, Johnson, as an officer, is given a horse to ride to the rear with his men. Stuart, because he was being a jerk, is made to walk through the mud to get to the rear. This attack sweeps down the east face of the Muleshoe, where it's finally stopped in this area here by James Lane's North Carolinians. Anybody here from North Carolina? Anybody? Well, you guys are a bunch of retirees. None of you might be from here. I don't know. So, and thanks for the love over here for James Lane. He's a hard-fighting guy. He's a super dependable brigade commander. His men are good, stalwart guys. Unfortunately, they're the ones who accidentally killed Stonewall Jackson the year before. And so they've been like underneath the shroud ever since. But they're good, a great unit. And they're already holding off feeble attacks from Dar over here and Ambrose Burnside. And as they're doing that, say, and they got to do this two-front defense. But this is where the breakthrough stops. Over on the west face of the Muleshoe, some of the most famous units in the Confederate Army, gone. This is such an overwhelming attack. Anybody here fan of the Louisiana Tigers? Yeah, booze, right? They're about to have a bad day. They're just boom, gone. Stonewall Brigade fans? Anybody here Stonewall Brigade fan? Come on, give me some Stonewall love. Come on. Okay, at least a couple of it. Thank you. All right. Gone. It's like the Stonewall Brigade no longer exists after Spotsylvania. This attack sweeps down to the area where Upton broke through, where they're finally stopped by Junius Daniel, another North Carolina. Daniels will get shot through the bowels and will die, but his men hold. And now, this is where Robert E. Lee comes onto the battlefield from his headquarters. His army has a gaping chest wound half a mile wide, and he has to figure out what to do. First person he turns to is his second in command, Richard Ewell, who's in charge of this part of the battlefield. Ewell is going off like a teapot on the boil, sputtering, swearing, cussing, calling his men cowards, slapping them with the flat side of his sword, extolling them to get back in the line. And they just continue to stream by him. And Lee, the very picture of calm, cool collectedness, rides up and he says, General Ewell, how do you propose to control your men if you cannot control yourself? And he gives Ewell a timeout. Okay? And instead, he will turn to one of Ewell's acting division commanders, John Brown Gordon, who's like, oh, send me in, coach. I'm ready. All right. And what Lee wants to do is take Gordon's men and lead them on a counterattack to link up with Lane and then drive in this direction, forcing the Federals out of the works. Except the men refused to go forward, as they had done several days earlier at the Wilderness, as they had done on the 10th of May. Now they do again on the 12th. They begin to shout out, Lee to the rear, Lee to the rear. We won't go forward unless General Lee goes to the rear. They understand that at this moment, Lee is the indispensable man of the Confederacy. If something happens to him, game over. That's it. And they refuse to let the commander put himself in harm's way. And Gordon, he's in full cheerleader mode at this point. He's like, General Lee, these men are Georgians. These men are Virginians. They've never let you down, and they won't now. Will you, boys? And the crowd goes wild. Oh! And I swear this is where laser beams are invented, because some corporal grabs the bridle of Lee's horse and hauls Lee to the rear, and Lee gives him the old evil eye. As Gordon leads that counterattack, linking up with Lane and driving up to the tip of the Muleshoe, forcing Federals out of the works. Federals simply just hunker down on the outside of the works, digging a parallel line of works of their own. They're going to trade pot shots with the Confederates through here for the rest of the day on the 12th. So then Lee, who understands this corporal's only doing his duty, quickly collects himself. He's going to turn his attention to this side of the breakthrough. Okay? He's going to send in Stephen Ramseur's North Carolinians. They have starring roles in today's fight. Ramseur will get shot down leading that counterattack. He'll survive. But his men link up with Daniels and begin driving up this direction, forcing Federals out of the works and pushing forward. The next guy is going to turn to Abner Perrin's Alabamians. Perrin says, I'm either coming back alive, Major General, or a dead brigadier. And he comes back a dead brigadier. He knows this is desperate stuff. He'll be shot down. killed. But his men link up, continue to fill the gap. Nathaniel Harris's Mississippians, 800 strong, many of whom are carrying camp hatchets. Now, picture in your mind an auditorium full of crazy Mississippians with hatchets running at you. They end up plugging in, connecting up, driving up toward the tip of the mule shoe. Sam McGowan's South Carolinians, they get sent in. McGowan will get hit for the 4th time in the war. He's one of the war's great bullet magnets, but his men connect, driving up in that direction, even as Horatio Wright's 20,000 reinforcements from the 6th Corps have gotten into position and begun flooding across that field. But because of all the firefight going on here, they're not eager to just run into the gap. So they stay protected in that swale that I talked about, using the protection that it offers as long as they can. And so instead of coming straight across the field into this gap, they get into that field and it funnels them diagonally across the room. And it spits them out right about where you are, which is the same place McGowan happens to be fighting his way up to. And so this area here becomes the epicenter of this fight. Men later describe this as a Golgotha, a place of skulls. One soldier describes it as a Saturnalia of blood and a panoply of horror. Men call it Hell's Half Acre. But today we know it most famously as the Bloody Angle, just a 13-degree bend in the line, where for 20 straight hours, in the pouring rain, in mud up to their knees in these trenches, men engage in the most sustained hand-to-hand combat of the entire Civil War, shooting each other at point-blank range, stabbing each other with their bayonets, using their rifles as clubs, throwing them like spears, using their camp hatchets, sticks, rocks, fists, teeth. Men were not as men, but as demons, said John Haley of the 17th Maine. This continues in this horrific fashion. Men injured so badly that they fall down into the mud and can't pull themselves up because they're stuck, and they get trampled and suffocate and die or drowned in the water. Bodies stack up 3, 4, 5 deep. And this carnage continues not because Lee is trying to recapture this position, but because he's trying to finally seal it off. The survivors of Johnson's Corps begin digging in, creating a new position. But Lee needs time to do it, and so he's going to trade lives for time. He's going to trade the lives of his men to save the life of his army. And so he'll keep feeding reinforcements in here. Federals trying to find purchase and can't, and they'll move and try to find purchase and can't. And it will just be a horror show unlike anything any of these men had ever seen. Until finally at about 2 a.m. on May 13th, Lee sends word to the front for his men to begin to withdraw. And in 2s and 3s, they fall back from the front. Federals realize something's up. They make a final push, capture the last couple hundred Confederates that are here, and begin a cautious advance into the center of the mule shoe. Those artillery pieces that Lee had sent away, they had arrived back in the battle just in time for most of them to get captured. William Carter's guns get off one shot. 20 of them get swept off the field, but 10 of them do not, and they are now placed in this new position. And they begin bombarding that Federal advance, quickly discouraging it. The Federals fall back outside the mule shoe, even as dawn begins to lighten the drizzling sky. And the scene they see out here is carnage unprecedented in their careers as soldiers. One Union officer talks about being able to walk from the far side of the battlefield to the tip of the mule shoe without ever touching the ground because of the carpet of blue bodies across that field. And bodies are so shot up, they don't even resemble human beings anymore. One stretcher bearer talks about bodies being more like sponges than humans. One doctor with the 121st New York says that the bodies were jellies. They have to be scooped into the stretchers because there's nothing firm enough to lift them into them. Men are identified by the remains of personal effects in their pockets because their corpses are so decimated. Some of you might know the story of the famous oak tree, the tip of the mule shoe, or tip of the bloody angle, 22-inch oak tree that was shot down by bullets. Now think about that. How much soft lead does it take to cut down 22 inches of oak? You can see that stump on display at the Smithsonian, the Museum of American History. It is a powerful reminder of the awfulness of this fight. There are going to be some 9,000 federal casualties, some 8,000 Confederate casualties. And the battle's only half over. We still have another week of Spotsylvania to go. On the 13th, Grant decides that he's going to try to get around Lee's right, and he's going to order the 5th Corps to move from over here and the 6th Corps to move here and just shift over here. And I want you to march overnight in the pouring rain and attack over here on the morning of the 14th. Grant's used to these small, springy armies that he had out west. The Army of the Potomac is not that army. So they're not able to get into position in time to launch that attack, which is good for Lee because he's not paying attention to his right flank. He has Wade Hampton's cavalry out here, and that's it. Had Grant been able to get here and attack, game over for Lee. But these men have been marching and fighting since the 4th. It's 10 days. No wonder they can't get over here, especially in the pouring rain. And so Lee's able to kind of get his men over here and make some adjustments. There is some fighting here at a place called Myers Hill, which was recently preserved by the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust. So then Grant's like, all right, now what else can I do? And he's going to try probing and poking and extending his line that way. Lee's going to strip Anderson's men out of there and extend his line in that direction. Off in the back corner, there's going to be a fight on the 15th as some of Lee's cavalry tries to attack Grant's supply line. Going to stumble into the United States colored troops, a division of them in the 9th Corps. Nobody knows what to do with the colored troops. We don't want to send them into battle because we don't know if they'll fight. We don't want people thinking they're going to be cannon fodder. We big political hot potato. I know. Let's have them guard the wagon train. So that's what they're doing. Thomas Rosser's cavalry runs into them. And boy, don't the USCT prove they can fight. They put the skier on Thomas Rosser, so embarrassed that he refuses to mention A, that he was beaten, and B, that he was beaten by black troops. Okay? But that's going to open the door for the Army of the Potomac to begin to utilize them more directly in the fight for their own freedom. Rain continues through the 16th. Finally, the sun comes out. Things start to dry up. Grant's going to shift half of his army from here back to over here and try to attack this same position again on the 18th. But the Confederates here have had 5 days to improve this position by that point. And so as Grant launches that attack on the 18th, he's going to launch the strongest fortified position yet created in the war by a field army. The artillery pieces that are here blast Grant's men off the field. It lasts 3 hours. Grant's men can't even get within rifle range because this position is so strong. And that's when Grant realizes, all right, I can't get at Lee at Spotsylvania. So I'm just going to go around again. So he starts putting together plans that are going to shift off to Lee's right, Grant's left, and eventually down toward the North Anna River. Except Lee's not done. He is going to launch an attack against Grant's supply line along this road on the 19th, hitting it at a place called Harris Farm, which is going to be in the back corner. Richard Ewell's 2nd Corps, in this really strong position, is going to get up, march out and around on a flank attack. Now, I talked earlier about this war of attrition that Grant is waging. We can see it illustrated really well in the battle at Harris Farm on the 19th. A year earlier, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, The same Second Corps under Stonewall Jackson executed a flank attack through the wilderness at Chancellorsville. He had 28,000 men for that flank attack. Ewell, commanding the same Second Corps, has 7,000 guys. Now, if any of you are mathematicians like I am, let me do the math for you because I couldn't otherwise do it. That's 21,000 men that the Second Corps has lost in a year. And part of that's Army reorganization and stuff like that. But think about that. The Second Corps has lost 21,000 men in a year. Ewell breaks through Grant's supply line, but there are literally reinforcements marching down that same road. Grant has begun to replenish his losses by stripping the garrisons around Washington you bring down heavy artillery units, giant regiments, 1,600 men strong, marching down that road, and boom, Ewell finds himself quickly overwhelmed, and only darkness saves him, and his men are able to get back into position and safety. The 20th of May, Grant looks around. Any more Confederate shenanigans? No? Okay. And on the night of the 20th, he'll begin to pull out and head toward North Anna. When he gets to North Anna, keeping in mind his losses and reinforcements that he's got, Grant's army will be at 68,000 men. He started this campaign with 120. He left the wilderness with 100. He has sustained tens of thousands of more and gotten reinforcements. So he's back up to 68. And as he gets closer to Richmond, he'll start drawing on the Army of the James. So he'll get more reinforcements there. His cavalry return to him. He'll get reinforcements there. Lee starts the wilderness with 66. He leaves the wilderness with 55. By the time he gets to North Anna, he will have just about 9,000 reinforcements that'll join him, and he'll be up to 54,000. It's as numerically close as the armies will ever be, ever, 68 to 54 at the North Anna. I'll be glad to come back and talk to you guys about that. It's the most fascinating part of the campaign to me. Grant has lost half of his army in this war of attrition. Goes both ways, doesn't it? We're not just going to wear down the Confederates. We're going to wear ourselves down too. And that's why morale across the North plummets in the summer of 64, because these casualty lists that appear in the newspapers are stunning. I don't know if any of you have bothered. I was just looking at casualty lists 2 nights ago. It's stunning. No wonder morale is terrible. But Grant can just keep bringing more reinforcements in. He can keep replenishing those losses. Lee cannot. When he gets to the North Anna, those 9,000 guys, which include Breckinridge from Newmarket and Pickett from Brewery's Bluff, that's it. That's all he's got. This war of attrition will continue. From the North Anna, they'll go down to Totopotomoy Creek. They'll go to Cold Harbor. They'll jump the James River to Petersburg. They'll settle into 9 months of siege, which will eventually break at the beginning of August of 65. And everyone flees west until Grant corners Lee in the parlor of Wilmer McLean at Appomattox Court House. What starts in the wilderness leads inexorably to Wilmer McLean's parlor. That's why the wilderness is the turning point of the war. But they first have to get through Spotsylvania. And it's a wonder either of these armies survive. And if you go to there today and you stand there and you look at the sumac, you feel the breeze in your cheeks, and you listen to the hum of the insects in the trees, and it is beautiful, beautiful stuff. It is stunning to be there. And to think about what those soldiers did as they fought and suffered and died there. And they would be so glad to have you stand there, enjoying how beautiful it is. They would be glad to have you remember. Thank you. Yeah. I have time for a few questions if folks want to ask, and then please come down and see me for some books. I have two granddaughters. My job is to spoil them, so all money goes to Spoil My Granddaughters Fund. Thanks.
Always do.
Thank you.
Boy, where do you know that leg exercise? Walking around.
I've been cooped up in the car all day. That's oh yeah. But, so that picture is actually looking across, like if you were here looking at the swale in that direction. So looking into the picture, you'd be looking north. Yep. Sort of like northeast. Mhm. Yeah, so the tree line in that picture, like the second court came out of that tree line and then sort of came not straight toward the camera, but more toward the right of the camera. So if I guess we're going to do some questions. If we could maybe turn on the handheld mic for a second, we could. Thank you very much. Oh, there's so that I would maybe 500 total by the time you get around both sides. Oh yeah. So like the mule shoe itself is about 1.25 miles, 1.5 miles in half circumference.
Where the north was coming out, going.
They were coming from the north. Yeah. That's the one that's coming. There's a paperback there called The Season of Slaughter, which is sort of like the Reader's Digest version of tonight's talk. And then the one that's coming out is like in depth, more in detail.
Hello.
So if we have time for just a few questions, I believe we're going to ask folks, or Gar's going to help us out here with the microphone.
Like one.
Actually, I can, yeah,
Hello.
let me
Hello.
take your questions first, if that's all right, if you don't mind.
All right, we've got at least one mic working now, so if you have questions, come on down, you can use this mic to ask the question.
Chris, real quick, you talked about Lane, in terms of North Carolinians. I just, for my information, I think, was 7th Tennessee part of that? 7th Tennessee Regiment, were they
As part
Lanes?
of whose?
of Lane?
No, so he's got just North Carolinians at this point.
Sorry?
He has just North Carolinians at this point,
Okay,
but there are some Tennesseans in the, there's one, I think only one regiment of Tennesseans over in Hill's 3rd Corps.
okay, I was trying to
I'd have
figure
to
it out.
double check my order of battle.
Yeah, I know, because at Gettysburg and everything else, the North Carolinians and Tennessee were
Yeah.
right with them. So I was wondering whether or not they were part of the Lanes or not.
Yeah, there are not many Tennesseans that are with Lee's army at this point.
Okay, yeah, I've been to Spotsylvania before.
Chris, you talked about Sheridan leaving Meade blind for a couple of weeks. Could you contrast that to when Lee was going up toward Gettysburg and
Sure. So when Lee, like people think that Lee had no cavalry with him during the Gettysburg campaign, which is not true. He actually has half of his cavalry with him. He just has the units that Stuart doesn't like and that are sort of the least efficient of Stuart's guys. So he doesn't necessarily use his cavalry especially effectively, but he has it. Whereas here, the only cavalry that's actually with Grant's forces, Burnside has his own cavalry because he's operating as an independent army. So he has limited eyes and ears on his part of the battlefield. And then there are 2 regiments that are with the headquarters guard that serve as provost. And that's it.
any other questions?
Thanks. Very good. Well, thank you all for being with me.